Morning, listeners. Welcome to Debra and Peter doing a podcast with me, Deborah Alcott-Tyler, and him, Peter Wanless. Peter, we cannot start the pod without congratulating our podcast producer, Jose. So listeners will know that Jose is a very, very Spanish name. And of course, he is personally responsible for the glorious victory that Spain had over Argentina in the World Cup last Sunday. Did you watch it?
I did. Yes, I watched it. I felt I had to. It's one of those things that you're kind of obliged to. It was a long, painful watch, though, I must say. That it was quite entertaining that Donald Trump was being forced to sit through probably one of the least entertaining games of soccer he'll ever have seen, and so that might keep him away from the game for a couple of years. Well,
I don't know, because didn't FIFA award him a Peace Prize or something? They're on the inaugural Peace Prize.
Oh, that was even before the competition.
Yeah.
And doesn't he now want the head of FIFA to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations or something? I mean,
I know
you couldn't make it up.
You really couldn't make it up. But none of that detracts from the fact that Spain won. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, most Brits were rooting for Spain.
Well, they won it, they passed it around an awful lot, but they won in some style, and Argentina lost with really ill grace, didn't they? So, I mean, we could have a little bit of a conversation about how do you lose gracefully, and what are the pros and cons. We don't always succeed at everything, do we? And sometimes we come second, and the way to behave is really not the way in which some of those Argentinian players reacted.
Yeah, there's how you behave publicly and how you behave privately. So, for example, when DSE loses out on a big piece of funding, for example, publicly we say, you know, that the organisation is great, etc. And behind the scenes, we're swearing and cursing and calling them all sorts of names under the sun. And I think that's what Argentina got wrong. They forgot that everybody was watching. You know, have a scrap in the changing rooms or in the thing, but don't do it on the field in front of everybody, where everybody can see exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, and respect your opponents. So that those photographs of them facing away from the trophy lift and that, it's a really bad look, isn't it? Although some people do complain now that it's all too matey, and these players who play with one another from different nations at their clubs are too busy hugging one another at the start of the game and at the end of the game, and they've lost their kind of competitive edge and they don't really care. So certainly the Argentinians cared about something. I don't know if they were on a massive bonus or or whatever.
Well, I don't think that can possibly be true, that you're less competitive with people because you're playing for the team. And if you think about cricket, you know, for example, the 100 has started now. And, you know, we watched a game the other day where it was, I can't remember, but, you know, two people who play for the England team, one a bowler and one a batter, facing each other. And they were absolutely aiming to take each other out. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you get into the competitive. But anyway, that's what people say. Well, Jose, our podcast producer, was telling us that there's loads of conspiracy theories online saying that Argentina were forced to lose, and it's all kind of like global conspiracy, and the FBI were involved and stuff like that. And you do sort of think the desperate things people will turn to in order to justify something. Actually, it makes me think of a very famous psychological book on psychology, which was published, 40s, I think, and it's called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it's like a seminal textbook, really, on how there's sort of a number of things. But firstly, how infected one gets by the people around you. And so you end up, you know, basically behaving in the same way, even if at the start of it you wouldn't have. And then secondly, how people will massively justify, they will find a reason why their thing was right, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. And there's this very interesting story about this group of, I don't know what you'd call them, but like a cult, really, who had this, the founding principle behind it was that there were a whole load of aliens who were watching over the earth, and that if you worship these aliens, they'd come down in a spaceship on, you know, Christmas Day or something, and they would take away all the followers and believers of the, you know, of this particular cult. And of course, what happened, and of course, it was in real time because they had it within a measurable, you know, it was this particular day. So what happened is on the day, psychologists and others turned up to like observe what happened. And of course, they all gathered together, you know, doing their chanting, what have you. And of course, as you're probably well aware, as we're still here, the alien spaceship didn't arrive and take them away and destroy the Earth. And what was most fascinating is that afterwards, the hoops and loops the individual members of this cult went through in order to explain why the thing they said would happen didn't. So the leader said, well, clearly our prayers worked, because they didn't feel, because we spread such good, news in the earth, it meant that's why the aliens didn't come. And it just strikes me that we do that both as organizations and as individuals. We post-rationalize. Human beings have to feel good about themselves. It's impossible. We can't survive or function as a normal human being if we don't have a way to feel okay about ourselves. And so what that means is when we do dreadful things or say dreadful things or make terrible mistakes, which we all do, I'm pretty sure all of us can look back in our history and see things we're deeply ashamed of. What we will do is explain it away to ourselves so that we can live with ourselves, you know what I mean? Because if you take away the ability to live with yourself and your decision, that you end up with people severely mentally ill, or people choosing, to take their own lives rather than face and accept the fact that we're just all flawed human beings who make mistakes. Anyway, that got me all thinking about that, you see.
It's very interesting, and we've talked before about, and this goes round in my head a lot, the difference between beliefs, which we hold on to be universal truths that define and describe how we approach any given situation, and evidence, which the logical part of the mind can bring to bear to any situation, and can, from time to time, if the evidence changes, allow you to adjust your position. But will it ever allow you to adjust your belief? And who are we to decide, what is a belief and what relies on evidence? So it is a very strange belief to think the world's going to end and we're going to be taken over by aliens. But if you think it's strong enough, just taking it back to football for a minute, I had this conversation with Wanless Jr., who is a huge Thomas Tuchel fan, and he brings to the table lots and lots of evidence about how this man is an elite football manager who is a winner and makes changes which transform football matches within the game. And there was some evidence of that during the tournament, and there's plenty of evidence before the tournament took place. But lots and lots of people, including those who don't really watch football, in that last England game thought that he made some strange decisions. And so I was talking to Bertie about this and sort of reflecting on, wouldn't it be interesting, and what a great example of leadership it would be if he came out after the game and reflected on what had happened and said, you know what, I didn't get that quite right, or there was another way of looking at it. And I believe that is what I would have done. And actually, Bertie almost agreed with me, but that's not what he's done. He has come out and essentially kind of described a situation where he knew what he was trying to do, but the players on the pitch weren't capable of executing it. And it's a type of leadership, isn't it? There are some leaders who have very clear demands and expectations on what they want people to do, and people may not be able to do it. And then you have others who are looking at the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and what they've got available to them, and saying, how can we train and develop and organize what we've got to play the best we can, or make the best. And both have value, don't they? But I don't know where I'm going with this.
No, but it's interesting because you're making me reflect as well, because I'm trying to think about our context at DSC, and I know I have very high standards and very high expectations for our team at DSC in what they deliver and how they deliver, but I don't feel like it's mine. I feel like we have a shared, we all expect to do a good job and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, I must go and talk to my team and wonder how much of it is me, standing on a big pile, on a big box shouting, do it like this, and how much is it shared? I mean, it feels shared to me. It feels that, I never ever have to say to anybody that isn't good enough, because they say it long before it's ever got anywhere near me. Do you know what I mean? It's like it feels so embedded. Yeah. But I would have to reflect, because of course that's what I think, because that's what I want to think.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, I will have to go and ask them.
And I've had occasions in the past where it has emerged in conversations that people have been reluctant to say something to me or share something with me because they don't think it fits with my worldview.
Yeah.
And that isn't healthy in an organization. I mean, if they keep coming up with the same point and you've talked it through and you've assessed the evidence and a decision has been taken, then just repeat going through that loop over and over again. That's not important. But, you know, I like to think of myself as being a really kind of open and engaging person who, if you've got an issue, comes to talk to me about it. But as we rise up organizations, we do, whether we like it or not, become less approachable, and the signals that we give have a rigidity and a strength to them which they didn't have when we were junior members of an organization. So it's definitely one to watch, and simply saying to people, tell me what you think, is definitely not the right answer. And
it doesn't always work. No,
I've talked before about, you know, when I arrived at the lottery and went to a sort of big meeting and encouraged people to say what they really thought, and there was a deafening silence, and I thought, what's this all about? And someone said to me, well, you know, Mao Zedong asked that question
exactly
back in the day, and look what happened.
Yeah, I do. I think this is fascinating, actually, because I'm thinking about mistakes, because like we just don't get cross about mistakes at DSC, even if they're big, walloping great ones. And I definitely don't, because, you know, every time somebody makes a mistake, I just look back on the several wallopingly massive mistakes that I've made during my career where being told off or humiliated did not help and didn't solve the problem. So we have this real culture at DSC of it's okay to admit mistakes, but I'm never told them. So I don't very often know if a mistake's been made. And I was curious about this. And this was a finance director we had a few years ago. And I asked him, you know, what about it? And he said, because you don't get cross about mistakes, we don't want to tell you the ones we've made because we feel like we'd be letting you down. You know, it's like it was weirdly coming from we want you to think we're brilliant. And that's why we won't tell you that we've made mistakes. I just thought it's like you can't win, can you, as a chief exec? You know, if you shout about the mistakes, they don't tell you. And if you say mistakes are no problem, let's move on, they don't tell you. Like, how the hell are you supposed to find out?
I wouldn't, I'm not a kind of shouting and screaming person, but I really don't like sloppiness. And so I'm not very forgiving of simple things which people really could and should have done correctly, and they haven't. And so I probably exude a kind of intolerance of that. So if people have done something really sloppy or not only put half their heart into it or half their kind of effort, and especially if it's something that has happened before, then
but I'd always be asking Peter, why? You know, why is it? Because most people want to do a good job most of the time. You know, there are very few people who are genuine shirkers and just want to turn up, get paid and, you know, skive off. So in my experience, most people want to do a good job most of the time. And we all have off days. Yeah. So if it's something like that, I would always be asking, why? What's happening in their circumstances? Is it that the manager isn't managing them well enough, they're not being supported properly? Were they given a job they really didn't want, and that's why they're not doing it right? Is it something they've said that's, do you know what I mean? I'm always interested. There's probably a reason, because most people want to do a good job most of the time, which I've now said about 40 times, but anyway. So
I wonder what expectations and performance measures Andy Burnham is setting for his new team, and how quickly they have to prove themselves, and what is them and what is him. It's a unique way of making appointments, isn't it? Constructing a group of ministers. Last time I was saying don't change very much at all. And that's been quite a lot of change, in fact.
Well, there hasn't. I mean, as my brilliant colleague Jay Kennedy wrote this week and published an article about it, is that actually it's been more of a sort of bringing back people who resigned because they weren't happy and shuffling around a few posts. There's not really any majorly new faces. I mean, there are some shocks, like I was very surprised at John Healey being given Chancellor, although, of course, people are now post-rationalising it, and completely gobsmacked that Wes Healey has gone to defence. Wes Streeting, has gone to defence, because that's for me is just frankly bizarre. But either way, you know, most of them are people who are still around. So we haven't. So Lisa Nandy stayed at DCMS. DCMS, by the way, has now absorbed digital, because
back to where it was.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing I find most frustrating about that is that, so Lisa and Andy has this massive brief, digital, media, culture, sport, youth, huge. So we, as the voluntary sector, get very little attention from Lisa because we're just one amongst a massive number of her very pressing concerns. But it's the same is true of our charities minister. She's not really the charities minister. She's the minister for charities, youth, sport and civil society. It's not even in that way, not that way around. And again, we get very little of her attention because it's more on other things. So there's just sort of an increasing message, even from this government, that voluntary sector, civil society as they call it, but they're mostly thinking about the voluntary sector, it's just getting pushed further and further and further down a little back alley. I mean, I always think I love Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I always think the way that he describes the Earth when he says it's something like a nondescript, like a nondescript little planet in a nondescript galaxy, a nondescript part of the universe. It's like a non-entity that's just about to be, mowed over for a new space bypass by the Vogons. I don't know if you've read Hitchhiker's Guide, Peter. Oh, no. I love it. You must. Oh my God, it's so brilliant. It's so clever. You must read it. Anyway, and so that's how he describes the Earth. So it really puts us in our place. It's like we're not really terribly important and we're far away. There are other bigger things to care about. And that for me is what it feels like. Every time we talk about ministerial appointments, it's like and even with Keir Starmer, like personally sponsoring the covenant and having a team in number 10 dedicated to that. That I wonder what would happen. And also the impact economy team, which we talked about before, about how weird that is. But anyway, that's been taken out of number 10 and put into DCMS as well. So you just sort of think, well, we don't really matter. And they're absolutely nuts when they don't realise how they can't run the economy, can't do anything without us. So, yeah. I don't know what you think.
Well, God, there's so many things to think about and talk about there. I mean, I'm quite pleased that the digital bit has been taken out of the business department because it was increasingly frustrating and concerning to those of us who are trying to campaign for a kind of a rights-based approach to technology that business growth and racing to be on the train to make as much money as we can as fast as possible was driving the kind of business department. And if this sector were treated the same as all the others, then I don't know. So I can. It's put back now to people who do think about young people. I mean, the DCMS is responsible for youth policy in various ways, isn't it? And it does have civil society, even if you feel it's rather kind of down the agenda. So I wasn't okay about that. I guess it depends really on what all this stuff about devolution and place-based problem solving means, because we know that our sector has got a huge amount to contribute to those sorts of conversations. So if those sorts of conversations are enabled and expected and encouraged and required across the piece, then that to me is more important necessarily than having a number of people with a civil society name at the kind of centre of government talking to one another about how important civil society is. So I don't think it all is necessarily lost there, but it's really early days and we'll see. The Wes Streeting thing is interesting because it reminds me so when the Prime Minister makes these appointments, some of them are made because of competence and subject expertise and experience, and some of them are made for political reasons. And some are rewards. Now, I guess I'm making all this up now. This is all supposition, but Wes Streeting needs to be rewarded for destabilising the previous regime and creating the conditions in which Andy Burnham could come through and not be challenged directly by someone else who's clearly very articulate and has leadership aspirations and expectations of his own. But if you stick him in a very visible domestic department, he's going to make a lot of noise, and he may not be able to sort of stop himself manoeuvring. And certainly there'll be lots of the press that will look at any and every step he takes through a lens of, is this Wes Streeting trying to undermine another prime minister? And it really, really reminded me of the mid-1990s when I worked for Michael Portillo, and he was constantly thought to be explicitly and implicitly undermining John Major and seeking to advance his own ambitions to be the next prime minister and the next leader of the Conservative Party. And when I eventually get round to writing my book, there may be a lot more I can say about this, but John Major put Michael Portillo into defence, absolutely, because it's a really important job. You need someone strong, clever, a good listener, and it's so much more of a vital issue probably today than it was in the mid-1990s. But you are fully occupied and you're abroad a lot of the time, and you can't, in the margins of being the Secretary of State for Defence, make a few remarks about the domestic agenda here or there. So it would be completely obvious if Wes Streeting strays off his brief into kind of pontificating about wider leadership issues. He's kind of got to leave that space to Andy Burnham. So I thought it was quite a clever way, a political appointment, to stick him somewhere where you need someone really good, but they're not going to kind of interfere with the domestic arena in which Andy Burnham kind of wants to reign supreme with his Manchester-based women.
High up the agenda as well, defence at the moment, isn't it? Because of everything that's going on. So presumably you have to work closely with, for goodness sake, who's our new Foreign Secretary?
Ed Miliband.
That's it. He'll have to work closely with Ed.
Yeah.
You can't separate defence and foreign policy very easily.
No.
You know, they sort of go together, don't they?
Definitely do. And John Healey as the chat. So I worked with John Healey back in the day. He was an education minister when I was at there years ago. Great survivor, really interesting politician who has views about devolution and the rest of it, which I think fit really well with Andy Burnham's approach. He's been a Treasury Minister in the past, and I guess, as a number of people have said, you know, he's got a bigger challenge now, because if you resign because you said the fundamental safety of the nation is at risk as a consequence of the lack of money being put into defence, he's going to have to find that from somewhere. And what the consequences of that are going to be for some other public services, only time will tell.
It's funny how, you know, like nations generally, when it comes to defence, have sort of put more money into killing people than to saving them. You know what I mean? It's like, it always just occurs to me, the bad irony. And
it's not the Ministry of Attack, it's the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. And it's how, and also what's interesting is how every single time they argue that, you know, they're not taking money away from somewhere else, and of course they are. You know, you have to make, you know, you have a budget, you have to make cuts, don't you? So, yeah, anyway, we'll see. I mean, already he's only in day, well, he started on Monday, didn't he? So day 5, in fact, because it's Friday today. So technically it's a good day. And already there's, you know, stuff coming out. So we'll see. I mean, this, you know, number 10 in the North thing, I just wonder how much of it will turn out to be performative. I mean, I believe he really means it, so I don't think he's faking it, but I wonder how much of it will turn out to be performative rather than real. I mean, I just think, like, with simple examples. So, you know, DSC, we have our staff scattered all over the country, and technically, probably the sort of the midpoint where we could all meet would probably be Birmingham or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
But then when we look at how much it would cost us to gather all our staff in Birmingham rather than to come to London, which is where we normally have our all-staff meetings, it just becomes unaffordable. It's ridiculously expensive and also more inconvenient, because it's actually not as easy to, you know, for one of our staff lives in Norfolk, and, you know, getting from Norfolk to Birmingham, not straight. Getting from Norfolk to London is straight. And so I think that, you know, when it comes down to it, the cost of doing this might well prohibit how effectively they can do it and how long it will last, because it's not simply isn't going to be cheap. And private sector will squeeze every bloody penny they can out of government contracts. She said,
yeah. I suppose if you can think of it as an expression of geography, but you can also think of it as an expression of power. And I think there's undoubtedly an over concentration of power in Whitehall, and the Treasury's got a lot of it, and Number 10 has got a lot of it, and the Cabinet Office has been growing and growing and has got a lot of it. And so if I'm being, Andy Burnham can tell his own story, but I think there's something attractive in having a alternative central source of power, which isn't just through a connecting door or kind of down the corridor. And it will be good for the country to have some of that power diffused. Now that then has got a bit confused with being the king of the north and the northwest and all these cabinet ministers that are being appointed from that particular place. So if we end up with kind of two concentrations of power that try and run the country in competition with one another, that would be
which is probably what will happen, Peter.
Well,
I think I think it, because the one thing, like, it's a bit like when, if you think about anything, because you're right, everything is in London. I mean, and there's a reason for that. It's the capital city, and it's got a population of 10 million people, and it's where the city and the banks and all are. So there's a reason for it. And I know, London is viewed with extreme disfavour by most of the rest of the country, even the south, actually, but particularly the Midlands and the north. But actually, it's not. It's been created like that for a reason, and it's because being close to power. And I wonder, one of the things I always think is when you're a senior team, you have to have good relationships with each other in order to be able to work together. And the less you see of each other, the less time you spend together, the harder those relationships get. And I just wonder how easy it will be, if Andy Burnham is up in Manchester most of the time, or if the Home Secretary is based in Birmingham, or being away from the Treasury or do you know what I mean? So there's a pragmatism to location, I think.
I do. Yeah, I do agree with that. At the same time, I remember being the director of comms and marketing at Education and Employment when we had sites in London and Sheffield. And Sheffield was a very strong concentration of the old employment department. It's where the Manpower Services Commission came from, and it had a real kind of culture and expertise and interest in employment markets. But so you had London, you had Sheffield, and then we had Darlington, and we had Runcorn. And part of the job of the department was to try and create some sort of identity for each of those sites and a sense of togetherness. And it was tricky. And I remember going to a session about internal communications and how you build culture across sites with other businesses. And I may have told this story before, but there was a guy there from the Standard Chartered Bank, and he couldn't believe how easy my job was, because I only had 4 sites and everyone spoke English. And he said, we translate our staff survey into whatever it was, 14 languages, and we're operating in 57 countries. And you tell me you're struggling to communicate between 4 places in England. So, it's not beyond. There are all kinds of organizations that do more complicated things than have an office in Manchester and an office in London. The stakes here are super high because of the power and influence. But
but you're absolutely right, Peter, actually, because if you think about it, especially now, video technology, we're all so used to seeing each other physically on screen.
Yeah.
And although that's not quite the same as knocking on someone's door and saying you've got 5 minutes for a cuppa, you can still do that virtually. I mean, my team do. They will very often have like slightly informal catch-ups just because they feel like it, or whatever. So actually you are right. There's no reason that those relationships should be fragmented, because we have a very strong culture, as at DSC, and we're all over the place. Like, nobody even lives next. People don't even live in the same city. Never mind. Within touching distance of each other, so you're absolutely right. It can work.
But I don't know how any of it helps Exeter. And Taunton, never mind Plymouth and Penzance, and I don't understand how devolution and devolved decision making through something more interesting than your local council is going to work in our part of the country. And I'm not sure it's any easier to understand that in the urban area of Manchester than it is in the urban area of London. In fact, it's probably more complicated because there are a reasonable number of people here who do face towards London because it's only 1 hour 40 on the train. And I went up to a meeting on Monday. I had a meeting in London 9:30. So I was on the sort of 6:20 train, had that meeting, and was back here for a meeting in Somerset at 4:00. So again, the distances are quite small in this country compared with a number of other places. But it does always seem to be us going to them rather than them coming to us. And look, God, I've only been here less than a year and I've got a chip on my shoulder about this.
Already.
And I keep turning up at meetings with onions and potatoes and cucumbers for people.
It does actually make you think of two things. It makes me think of Germany pre-unification, and I'm not talking about East and West Germany. I'm talking about, like 100 years or so back, when Germany wasn't one country. It was a series of feudal states, like principalities. It wasn't one nation, which it then became. And then, of course, it then split, and how it became there was less money spent on fighting and falling out when it became one big than when it was lots of feudals. And ditto, I sort of think about the states now, and you think about, how the bitter battles between various states over various policy issues, so it's not all good, it will create new problems of its own. However, having said that, let's, I'm not knocking it. Let's give it a go. I'm just interested to see how it will pan out. And I'm hoping that there will be lots of clever people thinking through all the implications. And more than anything, I hope that they will understand that if you have a diffuse and diverse set of offices and staff spread around the country, you cannot operate the same way as you used to when you were all in the same building, all in the same city. No. You have to change your working practices in order to make the most of it. So,
and you've got local people in civil society organisations who have got so much to contribute to those conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we didn't talk. We had a little list of three things we were going to talk about, and we haven't talked about any of them. So there we go.
I think that's true of most organisations in the country at the moment. Actually, what most people are talking about is Andy Burnham's new government rather than the stuff that they really ought to be talking about. But you're right. We'll go.
Yeah, I hope people found that interesting. I think we are missing for a couple of weeks. So everyone can take a little break and look forward to seeing and speaking to you before too long.
Yeah. Bye, Pete.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.